Hi everyone, and welcome to our channel. Today, we're diving into the extraordinary life of Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who rose from humble beginnings to shape the future of Europe. Stay tuned to discover his victories, his challenges, and the legacy he left behind. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769, on Corsica, a small island that was part of France, but had its own culture and history. His family was noble but not wealthy. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer who worked hard to support the family, while his mother, Letizia Bonaparte, made sure her children were well educated and cared for. Napoleon had a strong bond with his mother, but his relationship with his father was not close. Carlo was often away, and Napoleon felt he didn't show enough care. As a boy, Napoleon was often teased for his short height. He was only about 5, which was shorter than most Frenchmen at the time. People called him small or weak. But this teasing only made him more determined. He wanted to show that size didn't matter, and that he could achieve greatness. When he was 9, he went to mainland France to attend military school. It was a difficult time. He missed his family and was lonely. His classmates mocked his Corsican accent, which was very different from the French spoken in France. But Napoleon didn't let this hold him back. He studied hard, especially in mathematics, which would later help him in his military career. At 16, Napoleon graduated from military school and became a second lieutenant in the French army. He quickly showed his leadership skills, but his journey wasn't easy. France was in the middle of the French Revolution, with political unrest and fighting for power. Napoleon dreamed of helping his country rise above this chaos. He wanted to make France strong again, not just to rule it, but to unite the people and make them proud. Napoleon faced many challenges as a young officer. His background and size made other officers look down on him. He was often given tough, dangerous assignments, but he worked hard and pushed through every obstacle. But Napoleon was clever and persistent. He kept learning about war tactics, leadership, and ways to win battles. He was always studying, planning, and thinking about how to make France stronger. One key moment came when Napoleon was 20 years old. At that time, he was promoted to captain in the army. His first big leadership chance came during a battle in Italy. Even though the French were outnumbered, Napoleon led his troops with great skill and won the battle. This victory made people notice him, and at only 24 years old, he was promoted to general. That was a very young age to hold such a high rank, but it showed how much confidence people had in his abilities. Napoleon's dream was coming true. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a leader, commanding thousands of troops. Even though he was growing more powerful, he still faced many challenges. Some people didn't like him because he was from Corsica and thought he wasn't truly French. Others thought he was too ambitious and power-hungry. But Napoleon didn't care. He stayed focused on his goal. At this time, Napoleon was rising quickly in the French military. He had proven his talent, but he wasn't yet extremely powerful. His life was about to change, though, not only in his career, but also in his personal life. This was the year he met Josephine de Beauharnais, the love of his life. When they met, Josephine was 6 years older than Napoleon. She was 32, and he was 26. She was a widow. As her first husband had been executed during the French Revolution, she had 2 children and was known for her beauty, charm, and elegance. Napoleon was captivated by her the moment he saw her. He didn't care about their age difference. He fell deeply in love. Josephine stood out from other women Napoleon had known. She was graceful, confident, and mysterious. She had a way of charming people and attracted many admirers. At first, she didn't take Napoleon very seriously. He was younger, not very wealthy, and not yet very powerful. But Napoleon didn't give up. He wrote her passionate love letters, expressing how much he adored her. Even when he was away on military campaigns, he wrote to her constantly, telling her how much he missed her, how he dreamed of being with her, and how much he loved her. In one letter, Napoleon wrote, "Since I left you, I have been constantly sad. My happiness is to be near you. In the midst of my soldiers, my thoughts drift to you, my beloved. I love you more each day and long for your touch." Napoleon's love for Josephine was so intense that it sometimes distracted him from his duties. But Josephine didn't feel the same way. She enjoyed the attention and affection, but didn't love him as deeply. Still, Napoleon was determined to marry her, and in 1796, he succeeded. They were married on March 9, 1796, in a civil ceremony in Paris. Just 2 days later, Napoleon had to leave for battle. Napoleon was sent to Italy to lead the French army. France was at war with Austria, and the fighting was taking place in Italy. This was the first time Napoleon would command an entire army. At that point, the French troops in Italy were weak, poorly supplied, and discouraged. The soldiers had little food and no proper weapons. Many generals before Napoleon had failed in Italy. But Napoleon had something others didn't. Brilliant strategy and unshakable confidence. He transformed the army. He gave powerful speeches that made the soldiers believe they could win. He moved quickly and struck the Austrians and their allies before they were ready. His tactics were so unpredictable that his enemies never knew what he would do next. From 1796 to 1797, Napoleon won a series of brilliant victories. At the Battle of Lodi, he personally led his troops across a bridge under heavy fire, showing great bravery. At the Battle of Arcole, he grabbed a flag and ran straight toward the enemy lines, inspiring his soldiers to fight harder. At the Battle of Rivoli, he completely defeated the Austrians, forcing them to surrender. These victories turned Napoleon into a national hero. His soldiers admired him, and all of France began to see him as a true military genius. Even while on the battlefield, Napoleon never stopped thinking about Josephine. However, Josephine was not as faithful to him. She started an affair with another man while Napoleon was away. When Napoleon found out, he was heartbroken. But his love for Josephine was so strong that he forgave her. After his success in Italy, the French government gave Napoleon a new mission to invade Egypt. At that time, Napoleon was 28 years old. Britain was France's biggest enemy, and Britain controlled India, which was a very rich colony. Napoleon wanted to cut off Britain's trade route to India, so he planned to take over Egypt. Egypt was an important connection between Europe and Asia. Napoleon set sail with a large army and even brought scientists along. He didn't just want to conquer Egypt, he wanted to introduce French culture and knowledge. In one of his most famous battles, the Battle of the Pyramids in 1798, Napoleon's army faced the Mamluks, who ruled Egypt. The Mamluks were fierce warriors, but they fought using outdated methods. Napoleon used modern strategies, and the French won easily. Napoleon entered Cairo, the capital of Egypt, as a victorious conqueror, but then disaster struck. The British Navy, led by Admiral Horatio Nelson, destroyed Napoleon's fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Now, Napoleon and his army were trapped in Egypt, with no way to return to France by sea. Meanwhile, back in France, the government was weak and corrupt. Napoleon saw an opportunity. He secretly left Egypt and returned to France, leaving his army behind. When Napoleon arrived in Paris, the country was in chaos. The government was failing, and people had lost faith in their leaders. Napoleon realized this was his moment. On November 9, 1799, Napoleon led a coup d'état. He overthrew the government by force. He took control and made himself first consul, becoming the most powerful man in France at just 30 years old. Once in power, Napoleon focused on strengthening France. He introduced many changes. He fixed the economy by creating a solid financial system. He established new laws called the Napoleonic Code, which gave people more rights. He built schools and encouraged education. Napoleon also kept winning battles. In 1800, he defeated the Austrians again at the Battle of Marengo. The people of France adored him. They saw him as a leader who could bring stability and greatness to the country. Napoleon Bonaparte was no longer just a general or political leader. On December 2, 1804, he became Emperor of France in a grand ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. However, this coronation was unusual. Normally, a new ruler was crowned by the Pope as a sign that their power came from God. But Napoleon did something unexpected. At the last moment, he took the crown from the Pope and placed it on his own head. "I take my power with my own hands," he declared. This bold move shocked many people. It showed that Napoleon wanted to break from tradition and build an empire based on his own strength, not on religious authority. Standing beside Napoleon was his wife, Josephine, crowned as Empress. Despite her past unfaithfulness, Napoleon still cared for her deeply, yet their relationship would soon face more challenges. As emperor, Napoleon made other European leaders nervous. Countries like Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia saw him as a threat and feared that he would try to take over all of Europe. They were right. Napoleon dreamed of expanding the French Empire and defeating Britain, France's strongest enemy. But Britain had the most powerful navy in the world. Knowing he couldn't win at sea, Napoleon focused on land battles instead. In 1805, Austria and Russia joined forces to stop him. They had a massive army of 90,000 soldiers, while Napoleon only had 68,000. Many expected him to lose. However, Napoleon was one of history's greatest military minds. He came up with a clever strategy. He pretended his army was weak and acted like he was retreating. The Austrian and Russian armies fell for the trap. Then, at just the right moment, Napoleon's troops attacked from all sides with incredible speed and precision. The result was a stunning victory. Over 36,000 Austrian and Russian soldiers were killed or captured. The Austrian emperor had no choice but to surrender. Napoleon became the undisputed ruler of Europe. This battle, known as the Battle of Austerlitz, is still studied in military schools today. After the victory, Napoleon addressed his troops. "Soldiers, I am proud of you. This is one of the greatest victories in history. You have won the love of France." His soldiers admired him deeply and believed he was unbeatable. But Napoleon knew he still could not defeat Britain on the battlefield. Instead, he tried to weaken Britain through economic warfare. He introduced the Continental System, a rule that banned all European countries from trading with Britain. His plan was to ruin Britain's economy by cutting off trade. Unfortunately, the strategy didn't work. Many European countries secretly traded with Britain anyway. Even France's own economy suffered, as businesses struggled to get the goods they needed. In the end, the plan failed, and Britain remained strong. In 1807, Napoleon turned his focus to Russia and Prussia. At the Battle of Jena, his forces once again demonstrated their skill and determination. Napoleon completely defeated the Prussian army. The Prussian king had no choice but to surrender, and Napoleon's power grew stronger. However, his most difficult challenge was Russia. The Russian army was tough, their country was vast, and their warriors were skilled, but Napoleon was prepared. In 1807, he won the Battle of Friedland. After that victory, Tsar Alexander I of Russia was forced to sign a peace treaty with Napoleon. By now, almost all of Europe was under Napoleon's control. At this point, Napoleon was at the peak of his power. France was the most dominant nation in Europe, and his empire expanded every year. People viewed Napoleon as a legendary leader, but with great power came many challenges. He had wealth, victories, and authority, but he was missing one thing: an heir. Josephine, his beloved wife, had never given him a child. This was a serious problem, because an emperor needed a son to continue his dynasty. Although Napoleon loved Josephine, he knew he had to prioritize the future of his empire. In 1809, he made a painful decision. He divorced her. It broke both of their hearts. As Josephine left the palace, she cried uncontrollably. Napoleon later admitted, "Josephine, you were the only woman I truly loved." To secure an heir and a political alliance, he married Marie-Louise, the daughter of the Austrian emperor. She was only 18, while Napoleon was 41. A year later, in 1811, Marie-Louise gave birth to Napoleon's son, named Napoleon II. Finally, Napoleon had the heir he needed to continue his empire. But just as his personal life seemed to stabilize, his empire began to crumble. Napoleon made the worst mistake of his career when he decided to invade Russia. Russia had broken the peace treaty, and Napoleon sought to punish them. However, he underestimated the challenges of the Russian winter. With 600,000 soldiers, he marched into Russia. The Russians used a clever tactic. They burned their own cities and food supplies, leaving Napoleon's army with nothing to eat. As temperatures plummeted, French soldiers froze to death. By the time Napoleon returned to France, he had lost more than 500,000 men. This disastrous invasion marked the beginning of Napoleon's downfall. After losing so many troops in Russia, his enemies saw their chance. Europe's most powerful nations formed a new alliance against him, known as the Sixth Coalition. This alliance included Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and Spain. Despite losing 500,000 soldiers, Napoleon refused to surrender. He quickly built a new army with inexperienced recruits, young men inspired by Napoleon's unbreakable determination. Napoleon encouraged them, saying, "Soldiers, we may have lost battles, but we have not lost our honor. France still stands strong, and I will lead you to victory." However, this time Napoleon faced all of Europe united against him. His greatest battle took place in Leipzig, Germany, in October 1813. Napoleon commanded 200,000 troops, but the coalition army had 350,000 soldiers. It was the largest battle Europe had seen before World War I. For 3 days, Napoleon's troops fought with great bravery, but they were heavily outnumbered. Napoleon tried every strategy he could, but the enemy forces surrounded him from all sides. To make matters worse, some of his own allies turned against him. The Saxons fighting for Napoleon changed sides in the middle of the battle and started attacking the French. This was a disaster. Napoleon had to retreat, and as his army tried to escape, a bridge was destroyed too early, leaving thousands of French soldiers trapped. Napoleon watched in horror as many of his men drowned in the river or were killed by the enemy. By the end of the battle, Napoleon had lost 80,000 soldiers. His empire was falling apart. After this crushing defeat, the coalition forces invaded France. Their armies marched into Paris. The French people, who once saw Napoleon as a hero, now blamed him for their suffering. Even his own generals told him, "Emperor, we cannot fight anymore. We must surrender." Napoleon was heartbroken. He had devoted his entire life to France, and now even his most loyal men had lost faith in him. On April 6, 1814, Napoleon abdicated. He gave up his throne. For the first time in 20 years, he was no longer the ruler of France. But his enemies did not execute him. Instead, they sent him into exile on a small island called Elba, near Italy. Napoleon, who had once ruled over much of Europe, was now a prisoner on a tiny island. As he boarded the ship to Elba, he told his men, "France, I have given you everything, and now I must leave you," he cried as he waved goodbye to his soldiers. It seemed like Napoleon's story had come to an end. However, Napoleon was not the type of man to accept defeat. After just 10 months on Elba, he heard surprising news. The new French king, Louis XVIII, was unpopular. Many people missed Napoleon, and the army still supported him. So Napoleon escaped from Elba and returned to France. When he arrived with just 1,000 soldiers, he began marching toward Paris. The French king sent troops to stop him, but when Napoleon stood before them, he opened his coat and said, "If any man wants to kill his emperor, here I am." The soldiers remained silent and then joined him. Within 20 days, Napoleon entered Paris as emperor once again. It was one of history's most remarkable comebacks. The people celebrated, hoping Napoleon would restore France's glory. But his return made his enemies furious. The coalition powers, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, declared Napoleon a threat to the world and gathered their armies for one final battle. Napoleon's second reign, known as the 100 Days, would end in a climactic confrontation. On June 18, 1815, Napoleon faced the British and Prussian forces near the village of Waterloo in present-day Belgium. This battle would decide everything. Napoleon had 72,000 troops, while the British and Prussians had 118,000. Despite being outnumbered, Napoleon believed he could win. His troops fought hard and at first pushed back the British. Then disaster struck. A heavy rainstorm turned the battlefield into deep mud. Napoleon's cannons became stuck, slowing down his attacks. Then the Prussian forces arrived, and Napoleon's army was surrounded. The French fought bravely until the very end, but by evening it was clear Napoleon had lost. His dream of ruling Europe again was over. As his army fell apart, Napoleon rode away, knowing it was truly the end. After his defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon surrendered to the British. This time, they did not send him to a nearby island. Instead, they exiled him far away to Helena, a remote island in the Atlantic Ocean. There was no escape this time. Napoleon spent 6 years on Helena. He had no army, no power, and no hope of returning. At first, he spent his time writing memoirs about his life. He wanted the world to hear his side of the story. He wrote about his victories, his love for France, and the mistakes he had made. But as the years went by, his health grew worse. His body became weak. He had constant stomach pain. His hair fell out. He could no longer ride horses or walk far. He spent most of his days sitting and thinking. One of his few comforts was talking about his past. The followers who stayed with him on the island listened to his stories, amazed by the man who had once ruled much of Europe. One day he looked out at the endless ocean and said, "I was born on an island, and I am dying on an island." Napoleon knew his time was near. On the morning of May 5, 1821, Napoleon could barely speak. His final words were, "France Army. Head of the army, Josephine." At 5 8:49 p.m., Napoleon Bonaparte died. The great emperor, who had once controlled Europe and fought against the world's strongest armies, now lay in a simple bed, thousands of miles from his homeland. The British buried him on street, Helena under a plain tombstone. But before he died, Napoleon told his close friends, "I wish to be buried in Paris, near the Seine, among the French people I loved so much." His wish would eventually come true, but not right away. 19 years after his death, in 1840, the French people demanded that Napoleon's body be brought back to France. King Louis-Philippe sent a ship to St. Helena. When Napoleon's remains returned to Paris, thousands of people gathered to honor him. His coffin was placed on a golden carriage and carried through the streets. The crowds wept and cheered his name. Vive l'Empereur, long live the Emperor. Napoleon was finally laid to rest at Les Invalides, a magnificent tomb in the heart of Paris, where he still lies today. Even in death, Napoleon remained a legend. He trusted the wrong people. He believed he could keep winning forever, but that cost him everything. He once admitted, "I have made mistakes. I have seen the limits of my power. Success and fame are temporary," he learned. The true victory is knowing when to stop. To some, Napoleon was a hero. To others, he was a villain. In France, he was seen as a leader who brought glory and power. In Europe, he was seen as a threat who caused endless wars. No matter how people view him, Napoleon's name still echoes through history. He changed laws, redefined warfare, and inspired millions. Even today, his tactics are studied in military schools around the world. Napoleon proved that one man with a vision can change the world. Thank you for watching this incredible story. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Was Napoleon a hero or a villain? We'd love to hear your opinion. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story.